Thanks, guys. Tim, alcoholic.
Tim.
So, as most of you know, we did finish our 10 stories from the Pioneers, and we have 3 additional weeks to fulfill our commitment, our quarterly commitment. Last week we chose as an additional story, Acceptance Was the Answer, Dr. Paul O., page 407. Tonight we're doing Grounded. Grounded is a significant story, which we'll get into, but it's on page 552. And 522, excuse me, I apologize. I was ahead of myself because I am whetting your appetite for next week, which is Freedom from Bondage, which includes page 552. And that's the a page that we often refer to people on how to pray. So those are our 3 bonus stories. I was playing around with the book, and another great story to keep in mind, we won't read it, but I think it's good to have in our repertoire if you ever stub your toe with someone that has a problem with the Lord's Prayer, for a variety of reasons. I have seen people go into a circle, do the Lord's Prayer, and because they're Catholic, they stop right at the end of the prayer and don't do those last lines. Because that's the Protestant version. And I have seen our Jewish brethren not want to do the prayer because, A, I didn't grow up with the prayer, I don't even know what the prayer is, and B, that it's used in the church, so that kind of makes it a religious prayer. So, a good story that deals with that is A Drunk Like You, 398. A Drunk Like You, 398. When I have somebody that expresses some sort of reservation there, I have them read that story, and that usually relieves the issue. Okay, enough of that shenanigans. Grounded, page 522. Alcohol clipped this pilot's wings until sobriety and hard work brought him back to the sky. And this, of course, is the story of Lyle Prowse. His full name is Norman Lyle Prowse, but you'll never see that. It's always Lyle P. And I'll get into the story a little bit, but he has some great little details that we know. This is a story that is only in the 4th edition. I am an alcoholic. I am part Comanche Indian and grew up poor but in a loving home until alcoholism took both of my parents. Then the divorces came, 3 for each parent, and I learned the anger that is such a part of alcoholic family life. I vowed I would never be an alcoholic. Active in my Indian community, I saw what the alcohol did there also, and I was repelled and disgusted by it. I graduated from high school at 17 and immediately left to join the Marine Corps. I found a home there, relishing the tough discipline, camaraderie, and esprit de corps. I excelled and was one of the 3 who were promoted upon graduation from boot camp. 4.5 years later, I was given an opportunity to go into flight training. So this is very significant because for those of you who understand a military protocol, if you've gone from high school into the military, it implies that you've gone in as an enlisted man, which has the sort of, it's not 100%, but has the undertone of anybody that's an officer has graduated from 4 years of college and given a commission, an officer's commission. So this is not this kind of joining of the service. This is straight out of high school. He's enlisted. He's a private. There's no lower. You are the bottom of the totem pole. The guy who cleans the latrine, paints the walls, serves the food, that kind of thing, right? Success at the end of the 18-month period would mean pilot wings and an officer's commission. So they've recognized his abilities and have given him the opportunity to bypass all of that protocol and to be given an officer's commission without college. Almost unheard of. Almost unheard of. And beyond that, to be given the opportunity to be a pilot makes it even, like, I don't think there's one other example of this, right? And if we go one step further, to be a fighter pilot, which is the creme de la creme, near impossible. Again, I excelled. Although most of my peers had college educations and fear of failure constantly plagued me, I graduated near the top of my class. I excelled at something else also. Drinking was encouraged. The pilot persona was one of hard, gutsy flying with equally hard drinking, and attendance at happy hour was considered a duty. I did not need any encouragement and reveled in the squadron camaraderie, good-natured joking, and competition at these events. 1 year into my training, I reported for the final phase and met a young beauty. I was drunk the night I met her, and she would have nothing to do with me. But I could never have approached her without the false courage the alcohol gave me. The next day I saw her again, this time sober, and we began to date. I graduated from flight training on her 20th birthday, and she pinned my gold wings and my second lieutenant bars on me. We were married 2 weeks later. We have just celebrated our 35th anniversary, and she is the most wonderful person I could have ever found. We immediately had 2 young sons, and I left to go to war in Vietnam. 13 months later, I returned. I spent 11 and a half years total time in the Marine Corps before deciding to get out because of the family separation my military career required. I had seen enough family chaos to know that I could never allow that to occur in my own family. So, reluctantly, even painfully, I resigned my commission and joined a major airline. I had gained a reputation in the Marines I was proud of. I had many accomplishments to my credit, a good combat record with decorations, and skilled as a pilot. Slowly I worked my way up within the airline structure and finally became a captain after 20 years. He's a captain at Northwest Airlines. It had been a strife-ridden company, and our family endured some tough times. During one of the lengthy labor strikes, we adopted a baby girl. She completed our family. Nearly half Chippewa Indian, she was a beautiful baby of 17 days when we took her home with us. My drinking continued to escalate, but I did not believe I was any different from my drinking comrades. I was very wrong. I had 2 charges of driving under the influence, years apart, which I wrote off to bad luck, and I paid handsome legal fees to get the charges reduced. This was years before the Federal Aviation Administration began cross-checking drivers' records against pilots' licenses. So I just want to stop here for a second. So he mentions this baby girl that he's adopted, and he's completely enamored with this girl. This is his pride and joy. And they develop a relationship in which love of no bounds. This is storybook kind of stuff if you hear him talk about it. He does an hour talk and includes a big part of it is this story. And he actually turned down a captain's position because it would have required him to leave the family. So he stayed as a co-pilot because to become a captain, you'd have to leave and you're sort of a junior captain, not near your home. And the minute she got to the point where she was going to high school, he took the captain's position. And at the exact same time, she ran away. And he developed such a resentment, such a hate for this child, that it actually played a big part in his bottom. So for 2 years, prior to what we're going to read next, the daughter leaves. He's in complete a mess over it. He hates the girl now, tries to void the adoption papers, like goes like way over the top on it, like the resentment is like ridiculous. So in the big book, we see that once we start to drink at someone or at something, your trip to the bottom is much faster. So for 2 years prior to this, he's doing that. One night, and the night is March 7th, 1990. March 7th, 1990. One night after a hard afternoon and late evening of drinking, I and my two fellow flight crew members were arrested. We were charged with violation of a federal law that prohibits the operation of a common carrier while impaired. It had never been used against airline pilots before. I was devastated. Suddenly, I was thrust into an experience beyond my worst nightmare. So, very specifically, what happened was the three of them, the captain, co-pilot, and engineer, all went out drinking the night prior. They get on the plane. They do a flight from, I think, Fargo to Minneapolis. They do a short hop. It's a 40-minute flight. And when they land, they're arrested. The police actually come on board the plane, and they're the first removed off of the plane. And it's national news. So he's been arrested. I arrived home the next day, sick at heart and unable to look my wife in the face. Ashamed and destroyed. I saw 2 doctors that day and was diagnosed as an alcoholic. I was in treatment that night, going in with only the clothes on my back. The news media had picked up the story, and it was blared all over the world, on all the major television networks, and my shame and humiliation were beyond words. All the light in my life had gone out, and I entertained the idea of suicide. I could not envision ever smiling again or having a day with a bright horizon. I was hurting more than I ever knew a human could hurt, and I just wanted the pain to end. And one of these 2 doctors is the therapist he and his wife saw for 2 years, dealing with the loss of the daughter, with the daughter leaving. I became notorious in commercial aviation, and the media had a field day with me. I lost my FAA medical certificate because of my diagnosis of alcoholism, and the FAA issued an emergency revocation of all my licenses. I thought my parents, now both dead, my Indian people, and all those I had previously considered alcoholics, and I knew I had become exactly what I vowed I would never become. I learned my career was over via the 6 o'clock news 1 week after entering treatment. I refused to watch TV, but my fellow patients kept me informed. I was the lead story on the news for weeks. I was joke fodder for the late-night TV comics as they ridiculed me, my profession, and my airline. I also learned I was going to federal prison. The sentence was mandatory if convicted, and there was no doubt in my mind that I would be. With nothing left, I dedicated myself to learning about recovery. I fervently believed that the key to my sobriety, and hence my survival, lay in the power of all I was being taught, and I spent no idle moments in treatment. I worked as hard as I had worked to earn my wings. But this time, my life was at stake. I struggled to regain a spiritual connection. I underwent one legal crisis after another. As I got out of treatment, determined to complete 90 AA meetings in 90 days, but was afraid my court date would interfere, so I completed my 90 meetings in 67 days. I went through an intense, media-covered 3-week trial. On most evenings after the day in court, I sought refuge in AA meetings and renewed my strength for the coming day. Recovery and all I had learned allowed me to handle things much, much differently than my 2 co-defendants. Many spoke of my serenity throughout this experience of horror, which surprised me. Inside, I did not feel what others seemed to see. I was found guilty and sentenced to 16 months in federal prison. My two co-defendants received 12-month sentences and chose to remain free pending appeals, while I chose to go into prison and get it over. I had learned how to live life on life's terms and not my own. From somewhere back in my high school days, I remembered a poem that says something to the effect of, "Cowards die 1,000 deaths, a brave man only once." And I wanted to do what had to be done. I was terrified of walking into prison, but told my children that I could not come out the back door until I walked through the front. I remembered that courage was not the absence of fear, it was the ability to continue in the face of it. On the day I entered prison, 9 of my fellow pilots began making my family's house payments, which they did for nearly 4 years. After my release from prison, I made 4 attempts to get them to let us take over, and they refused each time. So many came to help us from places we could never have imagined. I served 424 days in the federal prison system. I started an AA meeting in prison, which was opposed by the prison administration, and they hassled us weekly as we came together to meet. The weekly meeting was a quiet oasis in the desert, a few moments of serenity in a prison full of bedlam. He was in Georgia. I think Atlanta, Georgia was the prison. My prison term was followed by 3 years of probation, which restricted my travel and had 13 other conditions. Upon release from prison, no longer a pilot, I returned to the same treatment center where I had once been a patient and worked full-time with other alcoholics. And he makes reference here to his pay, but it was $6.75 an hour. Pay was minimal, but I found I was effective at reaching others, and I wanted desperately to pay back some of what so many had given me. I did that for 20 months. For a long time, I did not consider flying again, but I could not purge the dream of doing so from my heart. One of my meditation books had said, "Before any dream can come true, there must first be a dream." I had been told if I wanted to fly again, I would have to begin at the very bottom with a private license, even though I had previously held the highest license the FAA awarded, the Air Transport Pilot License. I studied for and took all the lengthy FAA written examinations. I had to go back and relearn things I had learned 30 years before and had long since forgotten. I had unexpectedly been able to reacquire my FAA medical certificate after proving the quality of my sobriety for more than 2 years. The trial judge had put sanctions on me that made it impossible for me to fly again because of my age. My lawyer had become my friend and worked for 3 years after my conviction without taking a cent from me. He was one more person who entered my life in a manner I could only ascribe to some kind of divine providence. He took a motion to the judge to lift the sanctions, and the tears came flooding down my cheeks when he called to let me know the judge had approved. With the lifting of those sanctions, the impossible became slightly less impossible. An extraordinary amount of work was left to do, but at least the attempt could now be made. None of my friends thought it possible to regain licenses literally from the ground up, but I had learned how to do many things one day at a time, one small step at a time, so I went after the licenses in exactly that manner. Had I chosen to view the whole panorama of licensing requirements, I would have quit. They were simply too overwhelming. But one day and one thing at a time, they were doable. So I did them. I knew no one would ever hire me to fly passengers. I was an ex-con, a convicted felon, a drunk. I had doubts as to whether anyone would even allow me to fly cargo. It took several months for the FAA to process my licenses and mail them to me. On the exact day they arrived, another miracle occurred. I received a phone call from the head of the pilot union, who informed me that the president of the airline had decided personally to reinstate me. I had not pursued the legal grievance process I was entitled to, because I knew my actions could never be defended or excused. I had steadfastly accepted responsibility in front of TV cameras and in the treatment center, because my recovery demanded rigorous honesty. It was almost beyond my ability to believe that the president of the airline could ever consider having me work for them again. I marveled at the courage of such a man and such an airline. What if I relapsed? What if I flew drunk again? The media would have a field day. For days afterward, as I woke each morning, my first thought was, it had only been a dream, that it could not possibly have occurred. Almost 4 years after my arrest and the explosive devastation of my life, I signed my back-to-work agreement, restored to full seniority, given the retirement I had lost, and once again an airline pilot. A large crowd gathered to watch me sign the document. So much had happened in my life. I lost almost everything I had worked to acquire. My family had suffered public shame and humiliation. I had been the object of scorn, shame, and disgrace. Yet much more had also happened. Every loss had been replaced with rewards. I had seen the promises of the Big Book come true in a magnitude I could never have imagined. I had gotten sober. I had regained my family, and we were once again close and loving. I had learned how to use the 12 steps and to live the wonderful program that was founded so many years ago by two drunks. So getting the family back together, and while he was in treatment, he did reach out for his daughter. The wife had some communications with her, and a complete relationship was restored. It took several years, but I learned to be grateful for my alcoholism and the program of recovery it forced me into, for all the things that had happened to me and for me, for a life today that transcends and far exceeds anything I had previously known. I could not have that today if I had not experienced all the yesterdays. So I think that makes a great point. If he would have held on to that resentment regarding the daughter, regarding being fired, regarding himself having to go to prison, he never could have had the wherewithal, the spiritual power to have regained all those things. In other words, it's almost as though the door will never open if we hold on to that past. My back-to-work agreement said I would retire as a co-pilot, but the miracles of this program have never ceased for me. And last year I was notified that the president of my airline had granted permission for me to once again be a captain. I retired at age 60, and I checked out as a 747 captain, which means my final year at my airline concluded in the left seat. The circle, so sacred to my Indian people, will once again have been completed. I take little credit for all that has happened. I suited up and showed up, but the process of AA, the grace of a loving God, and the help of so many around me have been far more responsible for all the events in my life. Today, one of my sons has more than 3.5 years of sobriety after nearly losing his life to alcohol and drugs. He is truly one more miracle in my life, for which I am so deeply grateful. I have returned to my Indian people once again after a long, shame-filled absence. I am dancing again and returning to the old ways I left behind. I have spoken at 2 Native American AA conventions, something I never thought I'd see when I was a youngster growing up. Adversity truly introduces us to ourselves. The bottom, right? Adversity truly introduces us to ourselves, but we need never deal with our adversities alone as long as we can find another alcoholic in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And just the end on that story is on the way out, Bill Clinton actually pardoned this guy. And a lot of it was to do with the help of the judge that sentenced him. He wrote a 3-page recommendation that helped him get the pardon. Great, thanks so much.